following program is brought to you in part by the Fraser River Discovery Center, dedicated to the enhancement of the story of the Fraser River, today, tomorrow, and forever. The late 1850s witnessed an event of singular importance in what is now British Columbia. It changed forever the land, its people, and the life they would lead. That event was the Fraser River Gold Rush.
So grab some grub and blankets, a shovel, pick and pan. Your dream is waiting on a Fraser bar. Woo! We're California miners and we'll take gold where we can. Come on, boys, and reach up for a star. Patch the rusty boilers on them Sacramento steamers, and if they float, don't worry that they're old. Knock their seams and change their names and fill them up with dreamers. Then join the mad stampede for Fraser Gold.
This is the Fraser Canyon, and little has changed here in the past 150 years. But while the rugged landscape remains, what was found here changed completely the area that is now British Columbia. Hello, I'm Archie Miller. Along the Fraser River in the early 1800s, there was exploration with Simon Fraser. There was industry with fish and furs. There was commerce with the Hudson Bay Company and forts at Langley, Hope, and Yale. And there was the simple life of the native people. The Fraser River Gold Rush of 1858 changed all that. Where just before there was a handful of souls living, now there were hundreds, thousands of prospectors, all seeking their fortunes.
Gold. It has been called the pioneer of civilization because it has lured men and women across broad seas and endless prairies, through unforgiving deserts, and over forbidding mountain ranges into unknown wilderness. Each gold rush has marked the beginning of new territories and countries, and gold has done more to populate new lands than any army of immigration agents or real estate promoters ever could. This was particularly true of the celebrated California Gold Rush of 1849, and of the mad rush to the Fraser River a decade later. One gold rush historian has estimated that the Fraser River produced more than twice as much gold in 20 years as the total amount of gold that Spain obtained from the Americas in 2 centuries. We'll never know how many millions of dollars worth of gold was really taken from the shores of the Fraser. But how did it all happen? What were the events that brought 30,000 American adventurers swarming to the banks of the Fraser in a mass movement of people from all walks of life, with one thing in common: the quest for a golden grail?
In ancient times, the western land was buckled, heaved, and lifted, its golden veins exposed to watercourses. Particles of gold washed loose, then spun through time and drifted, moving with the river's primal forces until the gold's weight caused it, where at last the current slackened, to settle and to go back to the land, to mingle with the particles of iron ore that blackened the riverbanks made up of gold and sand. All the gold mankind has mined still is in existence in a bracelet, or a wedding ring, or vault. It may have come from Egypt, or from Yucatan, for instance, or been pried out of a Yukon side hill fault, or it may have come from particles of gold dust that was panned where the Fraser River held her secret tight, until a Frisco miner learned the secret of the sands, and a canvas city sprang up overnight.
For countless ages, the Fraser River has cut its channel into the land through which it flows. Each year, this river carries millions of tons of sediment from its headwater to its mouth. The Fraser River flows through a number of areas which are gold-bearing. In some, the river simply uncovers the precious metal. In others, the current picks it up and carries it until river speed and gravity take over and allow for millions of years of sediment, laced with gold flakes and nuggets, to drop for the eye and effort of the prospector. Early explorers had no idea of the treasure that lay beneath their feet.
Simon Fraser is probably the most unsung of North America's major explorers. In the spring of 1808, he set out to find a new supply route for the Northwest Company's fur trading business by following what he believed to be the Columbia River. It's bitter irony, according to his daughter, that Simon Fraser died in poverty, too poor to travel to England to accept a knighthood. For half a century earlier, when he hiked and camped along the river later named after him, he was walking on gold. During the exploration of this unknown river, Fraser and his companions overcame treacherous rapids, cliff-hanging portages, and hostile natives. Simon Fraser's lieutenant, mapmaker, and friend John Stewart might have looked back at the venture that historian Bruce Hutcheson called the most desperate expedition in the history of Western civilization.
Of all the river ventures I was part of long ago, the trek down Fraser's River stands out strong. It steals into my senses like a fragrance that I know, or the near but distant haunting of a song. I can feel the fear gut punch me at that spectral canyon place where I dangled from a shredding rock-frayed vine, and I can feel the stone-blind chief who'd never seen a white man's face use fingertips to trace the shape of mine. I can smell the pine and sagebrush and the salmon in the sun, and the sulphur stench that meant the sea was near, and smoke from pipes and campfires mixed and blended into one, and cedar boughs, and sweat that's made of fear. I can hear the natives' paddles slapping time when they attacked, and their war cries when our dugouts slammed aground, and the constant cannon thunder at the canyon's cataract, where the firing of a musket made no sound. Of all my high adventures with Nor'westers long ago, most memories have thinned or gone away, but my dreams of Fraser's River never fade with time, but grow. Are you sure it wasn't only yesterday?
This monument in New Westminster was erected in recognition of the anniversary of Fraser's journey, when he and his companions traveled through uncharted territory down a wild and unknown river that turned out not to be the Columbia. Though greatly disappointed, Fraser completed his exploration, not realizing the riches that surrounded him.
In April 1858, Governor Douglas reported that the Thompson River Indians had traded 800 ounces of gold to the Hudson's Bay Company. Considering that the Hudson's Bay Company didn't want hordes of Americans disturbing the Fraser River fur trading reserve, what happened next seems extremely naive in retrospect. First, it was published in Oregon and Washington Territory newspapers that all Americans digging for gold in British territory would first have to purchase a mining license from the Crown at Victoria. Of course, this suggested that there would be gold here in New Caledonia. Then, incredibly, the Hudson Bay Company itself sent the 800 ounces of gold from the Thompson, a tributary of the Fraser River, to the United States Mint at San Francisco, to be stamped into special coins to commemorate the discovery of gold in the colonies. As it turned out, one of the supervisors at the Mint was an adventurous type, and his interest in this gold triggered a very significant historical event, the Fraser River Gold Rush.
I was with some friends down on the waterfront in San Francisco, and we heard about the gold up north, up in the British territory on Fraser's River. Well, we got so excited because there was no more gold here in California, and they were talking about gold nuggets. They were as big as your fist. Well, we had to go. Everybody got their things together, didn't have much, but
we had to go because this time, we strike it rich.
I was supervisor at the Frisco Mint in '58 when a British vessel visited our port, and her purser brought in nuggets, 80 pounds in weight, picked up near their Thompson River fort. That night, down on the waterfront, I told my pals the tale. Then we all swigged toast and cheered and rushed to pack. For once gold fever seized us, we were frantic for the trail, and there weren't no power on earth could hold us back. We were hiking up the Fraser and called a halt to eat, 10 days later on a sandbar near Fort Yale, when Ed Hill saw a glimmer in some moss between his feet, just as we were breaking camp to hit the trail. He scooped a pan of moss and sand. The boys all gathered round. When he washed her down, we knew he'd struck a claim. Well, that's how the gold bonanza on the Fraser bars was found, and how the river entered myth and fame. Right off, we started panning $50 a man a day. Well, each day our leather gold cloaks grew in size. But soon we had to draw a high card for which of us would stay, and who would hike to Langley for supplies. Those who hiked downriver vowed to keep our find concealed. A nonchalant demeanor would be best. But legend says when gold's about, it always gets revealed. Soon word got out and flashed through the Northwest.
This area was British territory, but the discovery of gold brought a rush of mainly Americans, perceived as being unruly and somewhat dangerous by the locals. The Colonial Office sent a detachment of Royal Engineers to maintain law and order, among other things. But for most people, this area, and Yale in particular, was a wild frontier. The miners came from California, and they were seeking a second chance at the mother lode. They came from Oregon, they came from Puget Sound. They came from anywhere that news of the strike had reached.
In California, where the gold rush of 1849 had petered out, news of a brand new strike was electrifying. The discovery of Fraser gold meant a second chance for tens of thousands of 49ers. Never in history, before or since, has there been a gold rush so sudden and so fast. One observer recorded that the roads from the mountains were lined with foot passengers on their way to San Francisco. Stagecoaches came rolling into Sacramento, groaning under their living cargo of sturdy miners. The worm-eaten wharves of San Francisco trembled almost daily under the tread of the vast multitudes that gathered to see a northern steamer leave. The Fraser River gold rush was on.
3 cheers for the Fraser boys. They struck gold in the sand. It was found by Hill, a San Francisco bloke. It's at New Caledonia North in untamed fur trade land, and all you gotta do is fill your poke. So grab some grub and blankets, a shovel, pick and pan. Your dream is waiting on a Fraser bar. We're California miners, we'll take gold where we can. Come with us, boys, and reach up for a star. The Fraser's rich with sandbars like the Humbug, Hope, and Fountain. Hill's Bar near Yale was named for our Ed Hill. There's the Mormon and Kanaka at the foot of Jackass Mountain, and even one named after Dancin' Bill. Patch the rusty boilers on those Sacramento steamers, and if they float, don't worry that they're old. Caulk their seams and change their names and fill them up with dreamers. Then join the mad stampede for Fraser gold. Oil your Colt revolver and hone your Bowie knife. There's natives, British chaps, and grizzly bears. Kiss your ma goodbye, boys, and your sweetheart or your wife. You'll come back home with gold to mend their cares.
The miners who flocked to the Fraser were from all over the world and of many races. But the majority were American, and to be sure, they were a mixture of attitudes and dispositions. Some had followed other gold rushes, and the water wheel, the sluice box, was their stock in trade. Others were green, made lots of mistakes, frequently got into trouble. Some made money, most didn't. Still others used the rushes to hide from something, and they were always on the wrong side of peace and the law. They all had one thing in mind: to strike it rich. Many lived just for today, for women, gambling, and liquor, and not necessarily in that order.
It all led to Fraser River fever. Because of it, the crews of vessels in Puget Sound jumped ship. Soldiers at Fort Townsend and Fort Bellingham in Washington Territory deserted their posts. Houses in San Francisco and Sacramento that had cost $500 could be bought for $100. Businesses were boarded up, crops were abandoned in the fields. It seemed that everyone in California was headed for the Fraser.
Yeah, we were pleased to get to Victoria Harbor. The trip up, we're all packed on the boat, so we were really happy to see those little buildings all down along the shoreline. They landed us on some big rocks down there, no docks, so we went up to Main Street. It's kind of a quaint, dusty place, kind of crowded. We learned that just a few weeks before, it was quiet, real quiet. And those of us from California, we changed all that.
The sidewheel steamer Commodore was first to reach James Bay. Her anchor dropped one Sunday round mid-morning. When the good folks of Victoria filed out of church that day, they thought they'd been invaded with no warning. Our fellows wore revolvers and frontier hunting knives to be prepared for any situation. The husbands stepped protectively between us and their wives, whose hooped skirts fairly shook with indignation. When their governor, Jim Douglas, refused to give authority to let us take our steamboat across the strait. Well, some set up tents and settled in, but they were the minority, content to see new sights and rest and wait. Well, most hired native freight canoes or jerry-built a raft. One group got lost and paddled to Howe Sound. Some other chaps went missing in a homemade sailing craft. They'd been killed in Burrard's Bay when they were found.
While there were many ways to get to the gold fields of the lower Fraser, the method of choice was to travel on the river itself, on the river boats that ran on the river to the head of navigation at Yale. Most travel light, a bedroll, a frying pan, a couple of pots, all tied together with a cord. Most had a revolver and a large knife, which complemented an outfit that one traveler described as a red flannel shirt, blue pants, tall boots, a broad-brimmed hat, and a beard or mustache. Some were greenhorns, others old hands, but all could hardly wait to get to the river and its gold.
Of all the Fraser's gold-bearing sandbars, the sandy flats formed at river bends, Hill's Bar was the most famous and most productive. Located between Hope and Yale, it was about half a mile long, with the gold-bearing sand and gravel usually on the top 6 feet, extending 50 or 60 feet back from the shoreline. In 1858, this famous sandbar was one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in North America. It didn't take members of the native band at Yale long to appreciate the value of the gold as a trading commodity and how to mine it. About 300 native men, women, and children camped on Hill's Bar and began mining, far outnumbering the handful of discoverers from San Francisco. According to some gold rush historians, it was typical that the first boat pulled up the Fraser River to the gold diggings belonged to a whiskey trader. He began peddling bottles of cheap whiskey to the natives for his interpretation of $5 worth of gold dust. The hostility between the American miners and the local natives, magnified by alcohol, soon became explosive. Then a real-life coincidence happened that was as timely and dramatic as any rescue of a wagon train by charging cavalry in a Grade B movie, and may have changed the course of history in the Fraser Valley.
First trader to arrive was Captain Taylor, selling a whiskey, and not 1 pound of foodstuff in his cargo. We knew that mixing Indians and liquor was too risky and marched over to his camp to tell him so. But he continued trading rotgut for what gold dust he could get, and the natives yelled and whooped and howled all night. When we dumped his stock of booze, he was indignant and upset, but soon struck camp and left without a fight. Them native men would sometimes borrow tools not being used, but always had returned them when we said, until one we called Whitecap acted hostile and refused, so my partner broke a shovel on his head. We sprinted for our muskets, and the natives did the same. Us miners were outnumbered for a fight. Then, just in time to stop a war, the British soldiers came round the bend in the gunboat Satellite.
Douglas scolded the natives, pointed out that they didn't even have mining licenses, and ordered them back to their village near Yale. To help pacify them, he hosted a blowout feast of hardtack and molasses. Resentful about being banned from Hill's Bar and about the way they were treated by miners generally, the natives retaliated by attacking the miners working on the sandbars north of Yale. Alarmed, the miners fled to Yale for protection. San Francisco-style vigilante meetings soon triggered a brief but bloody battle glossed over by some early British historians. This may have been because the little-known Fraser Canyon War was an embarrassment. It was so very un-British.
The native men were bullied and degraded by the whites, and their women were abducted and abused. Forced to leave Hill's Bar, they felt that they had lost their rights. And what made it worse? The miners were amused. When headless Yankee corpses started surfacing near Hope, all miners in the canyon fled to Yale and elected frontier justice using posse, gun, and rope, then grimly took the Fraser Canyon Trail. Some of them carried long guns of imported English make, or shotguns for close quarters rock to rock. The natives fired arrows, poison-dipped and rattlesnake, and were trained to climb and ambush, hide, and stalk. When miners burned all catches of smoked salmon that they found, the natives' winter prospects looked so bleak that they soon devised a plan to get revenge and win back ground by setting up a trap at 10 Mile Creek. But the miners saw the strategy and torched the underbrush, then pot shot as the natives fled the flames. Soon the Canyon War was over, the natives had been crushed. The miners drifted back to work their claims. When the British rushed to Yale, they were too late on the scene, and they found the race relations tense and strained. So they named a British constable to keep the peace between the white men and what natives there remained.
Tales abound from this period, but often nobody knows what really happened. The problems that occurred in boomtowns like Yale had many causes, and most are quite obvious. Too many people, too much money or not enough, too much liquor. Some out-and-out cases of racism, greed, some unhealthy competition. Add to that mixture some men who truly did feel that violence was a good way to solve a situation, and you could have a volatile community. Well, there were some good, ordinary citizens and business people in Yale. The image was one of rowdiness and hostility, but in spite of it all, Yale survived and prospered.
Few British Columbia communities can match Yale at the southern entrance to the Fraser Canyon for historical importance. Simon Fraser paused here in 1808 before continuing downstream to the mouth of the river, and in 1847 the Hudson's Bay Company established Fort Yale, a stopover place for their fur brigades. In 1858, when the gold rush reached Fort Yale, a town site soon mushroomed into an American-style frontier boomtown, situated in British territory. David Higgins, a journalist who arrived at Yale in the summer of 1858, wrote, "Every other store was a gambling den and liquor outlet. Ruffians of the worst type, fugitives from justice, deserters from the United States who strutted about in army overcoats, refugees who'd been banished from San Francisco for life, ex-convicts, pugilists, highwaymen, petty thieves, murderers, and painted women. All were jumbled together in Yale and free to follow their purposes." After the gold rush passed it by, the population of Yale didn't evaporate as it did in most boomtowns. Yale continued to thrive as the head of navigation for the armada of paddle wheel boats that threshed their way north from Victoria and New Westminster, carrying passengers bound for the Caribou goldfields.
In those days, Yale was wild, absolutely wild. There was lots of money. We sat around drinking and gambling. We did that all the time. We were always listening. You're always paying attention. But you had to hear about the gold. You had to hear about that next strike. But those damned paddle wheel boats, they just kept coming. And they brought more men and more crowding. And your money didn't go as far. And Yale got to be so much like a big city.
Umatilla broke the ribbon of an era in the West when she climbed the Fraser all the way to Yale. She confirmed that on the Fraser, a stern wheel boat was best to reach the gateway to the canyon trail. As she threshed her way upstream, the miners shouted from the banks, and hoisted flags and fired guns to greet her. Then before her crew could heave her lines or shove ashore a plank, the excited miners waded out to meet her.
The gold-bearing sandbars of the lower Fraser became stepping stones for the restless prospectors. Looking for richer diggings, many moved upriver in search of the mother lode and new horizons. They were following the California theory that the further upriver the coarser the gold, the easier it was to recover. At some places they had to crawl along narrow ledges hundreds of feet above the river, using the same foot and handholds as Simon Fraser had used exactly a half-century before. Eventually, some of the prospectors turned up the Quesnel River to discover its gold-plated tributaries and to help create the epic legends of the Caribou Gold Rush.
Yeah, the things changed so fast. It got tougher. There wasn't much gold. I lost friends. One even shot himself. I stayed. Kept hearing stories about up north, but it don't make no sense. We came here to be up north. They're off on the trails up to Williams Creek and out to Wild Horse. But when you get the fever, for the gold, you've got to keep following it.
But not everyone moved on. Like California's Sacramento Valley, our Fraser Valley was first populated by settlers because of the discovery of gold. But the process of settlement was much more orderly here, largely because of the military presence and special skills of the Royal Engineers sent out from England. Under Colonel Richard Clement Moody, the engineers were soon at work as surveyors, architects, draftsmen, carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, miners, and photographers, helping to build a new land. New Westminster was founded and became a unique blend of Victorian England and the American Wild West. It became the hub of the valley, the marketplace where goods were bought, sold, and traded, and business was conducted. Governor Douglas even made sure that it had a mint, just like San Francisco. By 1861, only 3 years after the discovery of Fraser gold, there was a fall fair at New Westminster, with prizes awarded for the best Fraser Valley produce, including various crops and dairy products. And so it was that many adventurers who had come to the Fraser River searching for Fraser gold discovered instead the riches of her soil, her forests, and her salmon. Some stayed behind after the rush moved on to become Fraser Valley pioneers.
The Fraser River Gold Rush changed the way all life would be lived in the province of British Columbia. It encouraged development, the creation of towns and roads and communication. It inspired business and commercial enterprise. It urged prospectors to seek gold in other locations in the Caribou, in the Kootenay. The way in which this rush and the people who followed its lure altered this province can be seen in the many museums which chronicle this event, from Victoria to New Westminster to Yale to Barkerville. The story is there to be enjoyed. There are also many books available on the different areas and aspects of the gold rush. This is one topic where there is a wealth of information, and considering that that topic is gold, that seems perfectly appropriate. I'm Archie Miller. Thank you very much for watching.
Oil your gold revolver, boys, and hone your bowie knife. There's Injuns, British chaps, and grizzly bears. Kiss your goodbye, boys, and your sweetheart or your wife. You'll come back home with gold to mend their cares. So grab some grub and blankets, a shovel, pick, and pan. Your dream is waiting on a Fraser bar. We're California miners and we'll take gold where we can. Come on, boys, and reach up for a star. Come on, boys, and reach up for